All right, let's get to the wide receivers and the weapons on the outside. Kevin Austin put up almost 1,000 yards at like 19 yards per clip last year. He's off to the NFL draft, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep.
So Lorenzo Styles, Braden Lenzy, and some others. So what's that rotation potentially look like?
Well, we keep getting asked like who's the alpha gonna be at receiver, and I'm like Michael Mayer, right? Like that's gonna be their dude, right? And so at receiver, it's just about how can you fit in as part of like sort of complementary players. And we did a show yesterday about the wide receiver tight end unit on our channel, and the thing that we said is this could end up being the strength of the offense. The problem is because of a lack of numbers and some uncertainty, and the guys got to really prove themselves. The margin for error is like really narrow, and that's the thing is it could go from this is a great group to one guy gets hurt and another guy maybe doesn't pan out, and all of a sudden you're struggling with the weapons on the perimeter. And so there's a lot of potential there, but a lot they've got to prove. Braden Lindsay's shown that he can be a home run threat. He scored on the screens, he scored on reverses, he scored on jet sweeps, he scored on post routes. He's done a little bit of everything. He just has struggled to stay healthy the last couple of years. That's been an issue for him. And to be honest with you, Mark, he wasn't coached very well. And that was something that you've heard me complain about for the last couple of years, that this is a receiving core that just doesn't know how to play the game. And you even look at Kevin Austin, he's a kid that had, like 888 yards and 19 yards a clip, but then he disappears against Purdue. He disappears against Cincinnati. He disappears against USC and any other team that had any kind of big physical corners. They just come up and press him, and he didn't know what to do. And yet he still was able to have the success that he had. And it just was a really fundamentally unsound group. Now you get Braden Lindsay back for a fifth year. Lorenzo Styles is going to be a sophomore, and he finished his year on just a great note with 8 catches for 136 yards and a touchdown against Oklahoma State. And what's interesting is that's kind of where a lot of the excitement comes from with this group, because you have Mayer coming back. You saw Chris Tyree had over 100 yards receiving in that game. You look at what Lorenzo Styles did, had sort of his coming out party last year. And you've got Deion Colsey, who's emerging in that position group. Joe Wilkins is back as a 5th year. Avery Davis is coming back as a 6th year. He got hurt last year. And, last time we really saw him making plays, he's shown he can be a big play guy. We saw what he did, to Clemson in a clutch moment back in 2020. He had a big 60-yard touchdown catch against Purdue to kind of break that game open, and he's just a really solid all-around player. He's a captain. So the talent's there, and then in the fall, they're going to get Tobias Merriweather, who, I graded out as the best receiver recruit, my highest-graded receiver recruit for Notre Dame since probably going back to Michael Floyd back in 2008, which is, saying something. So there's a lot of weapons there, Mark, but all these guys we're talking about, it's if this guy can do this, and if this guy can do that, and if Braden Lindsay can improve his technique, and if he can stay healthy, and if Lorenzo Styles can take the next step, and if Deion Colsey can break out, and if Avery Davis is healthy, you don't ever really want to go into a season where you've got that many ifs. And I think that's where sort of the excitement has to be sort of, tempered a little bit and say, hey, look, yes, there's a lot of talent potential, but there's still a lot this group has to prove. But I think the way that they ended the season, you look at Oklahoma State, for example, in the 13 games before they played Notre Dame, they allowed one player to have 100 yards all season. Notre Dame had 3. And that doesn't include the 7 catches for 76 yards and 2 touchdowns Michael Mayer had. And, all but one of those guys is coming back. And I think that's where a lot of the excitement comes from, is we finally got to see Tommy Rees open things up in the second half of the year after Brian Kelly basically checked out, and just Tommy Rees was able to do kind of whatever he wanted to do. And you put in a running threat at quarterback, either Tyler Buckner, who will be a direct running threat, or Drew Pine, who's just a more mobile you kind of view him as like maybe a more mobile version of Jack Cohn. You start to say, boy, with the weapons they have coming back, they could be really good. And again, we haven't even talked about the fact that they may have the best tight end in college football. Brock Bowers, and there's a couple other guys are going to have a little something to say about that. But, Michael Mayer is certainly going to be in that conversation. And there's whoever the quarterback is, there's going to be a lot of talented weapons. And assuming the receivers can kind of take that next step, that's where a lot of the excitement comes from. Because in the past, Mark, we've seen like years where they had, great receivers, but maybe injuries at running back and injuries at quarterback, like we saw in 2015. And then there's a year in 2017 where they've got the best line in college football. They got dynamic running backs, and then, they just not great at receiver and a quarterback that can't really throw. This is the offense that, at least on paper, right? That's where we're at right now, is on paper, has a chance to kind of have really dynamic players at all of those spots. And, that's why I wrote the article I wrote this weekend that said, Look, people have used speed as an excuse for Notre Dame for years. That's not going to be an excuse for Notre Dame this year when it comes to their offense. Now they got other things they got to worry about, but speed is no. I mean, when a guy like Lorenzo Styles is maybe your third or fourth fastest guy on offense, you're you've got plenty of speed. It's just about, can that speed turn into football production? That's going to be the question mark.